Story 1. The Shed. Richard's hands shook slightly as he returned the blood-streaked hammer to the workbench. Unable to bring his eyes out to focus on his true task, he watched as a small clump of flesh slid down the side of the wooden handle, leaving a dark crimson trail in its wake. Even in the dimly lit work shed, he could see a clue, stir of short, dark hair protruding from the tiny piece of scalp. Richard tasted the sour hint of vomit at the back of his throat as he hesitantly lifted his gaze. Across the workbench, tightly bound in row pay, sat a monster concealed in the near-perfect guise of a human. The monster stared up at Richard with such a sincere look of confusion and horror that Richard almost believed he had made a mistake, that this one actually was human. Richard studied the beaten, blooded thing before him as it struggled at its bonds, letting out muffled sobs through the cloth gag it fought to free its right hand from the heavy-duty nail that pinned it to the table, while the left arm flailed about wildly, small splatters of blood spraying off the bloody, bandaged stump where its elbow ends was. Even if it managed to get its hand free, Richard knew it could never break the ropes that tied it to the heavy metal chair. Watching the frenzied, terrified thing, Richard almost changed. His mind almost decided he had made a mistake with this one. Almost. There were many more these days, thought Richard, all of them trying to fit in, trying to trick you into believing they were like the rest of us. Richard knew better. He found this one today at a small carnival just outside of Dallas. It was not alone, like so many before it. This one had a family, and he could call it a family. In hindsight, Richard could see how others, those not gifted with his unique ability to see through their masks, could be fooled by these things. The infant, wrapped neatly in a faded pink blanket, giggled as she played with a colorful, dinosaur-shaped rattle. The woman had hugged and kissed a man in what seemed to be a genuinely affectionate manner. So many still roamed his hometown, they felt no such emotions as love or affection. Richard knew they would torture and kill a human for no reason more than the sheer joy of it. And he knew that he was why one who would punish them for their heinous crimes. As he stared at the whimpering, bloody thing before him, Richard knew what must be done. The whimpers morphed into a squeal of pure terror as Richard picked the hammer up once again, and then shakily raised it over the pinned hand. Without thinking, with all of his might, Richard swung it down in a deadly arc, the sharp CLAW of the hammer becoming a dull gray blur of motion. The monster jerked back abruptly, letting loose a bright red spray, exposing tendons and the white of bone. The thing's hand, still pinned by the large nails, moved less than an inch before the hammer's claw reached it. Steel made its way through skin, flesh, and bone in the blink of an eye. The thing screamed a horrible, high-pitched yelp that even the tightly bound gag could not quiet. For long minutes, Richard waited as the screams slowly deteriorated into low moans of anguish. Richard bent down, his face coming close to the monster, his lips almost touching the thing's ear. He could feel the evil radiating off of the thing's skin in hot, sickening waves, but Richard held his ground. Confess, Ricker, Dee whispered. Admit what you are, what your family is, and you will all die quickly. The thing looked up at him and slowly shook its head, tears streaming down its eyes. Richard turned away, hoking back the vomit which so frequently came with close contact. Them, the second he began to turn away, he saw the flesh of the thing's face ripple out of the corner of his eye, forming the visage of the demon he knew lurked within. Richard spun around, hoping to catch a glance of the true face of the beast, but it was gone. Only the mask of a human remained. Richard was not fooled. Richard lowered the hammer back to the blood-splattered table, turned and opened the shed door. He paused briefly as his eyes adjusted to the bright summer sun. He glanced briefly at his den house, immaculate lawn and white picket fence. He had always found it amazing how he had done so well for himself while having such an important, time-consuming task. He had yet to use a single sick day in his S.E. Van years teaching second grade at Jefferson Elementary. As Richard neared his white van, he heard a muted thumping noise coming from within. He rushed towards the van, fearing the neighbors might become suspicious and come investigating the strange noise. The last thing he needed right now was another visit from a nosy neighbor. Only last year a nosy neighbor had caused trouble for Richard early one school morning, before I had even been able to make it out his front door. Rhea Mackenzie ambushed him. She spat numerous, vaguely accusing questions at him. She asked about weird noises she had heard coming from Richard's shed the night before. When she talked to Richard, she smiled and was oh so sickeningly polite, but he could see it in her eyes and hear it in the tone of her voice. She knew when she asked to go inside the shed. Richard knew what must be done. It was the first and only time he had ever murdered a human, and it was perhaps the second painful thing he had ever had to do. Sacrifices must be made for mankind. He knew that was the closest he had come to being discovered since the day he first destroyed a demon at the age of 19. How they managed to switch his little sister with one of them remained a mystery to him, but on that late autumn night when he spilled his first blood, he swore to himself that he would make them all pay for what they had made him do to the thing that wore the face of his little sister. She had always seemed normal to him, a loving child who, although annoying at times, was a good kid. Not on that day. On that day, something was different about her. Something sinister lurked behind those normally innocent eyes. Somehow they had taken his sister, and he knew something must be done. Only seconds after he began his grisly task, he started to think himself insane as Rachel, whom he loved more than he could ever put to words, begged him to stop. The sight of her frightened, tear-streaked eyes made him pause, but only briefly. Something deep within Richard told him that he must do this. He had dissected her as best he could with his small pocket knife. He examined the steaming entrails in the chill, dark forest, looking for something that would prove to the rest of the world what he already knew. He had become light-headed. He frantically pulled mound after mound of viscera from the still twitching corpse. He was sure that it contained some secret, that he must find some proof that he was not insane. It did not. Richard, face and hands smeared with blood, shook violently as he knelt over the thing that resembled his beloved sister. There were many questions as to what had happened to his sister, but Richard knew, even then, that he could trust no one else with his dark secret. It would forever be a weight that he would bear alone. He had lived happily after the passing of his sister, all signs of those things gone from his life for almost 12 years. until his fourth year. Our teaching the child was taken care of without incident. Less than a month later, Richard's wife changed. There had been many rumors and numerous questionings from the police, but he had always been careful. In the end, the police had come to the conclusion that the murdered boy's father had been having an affair with Richard's wife, and after she had tried to break it off, the father had not only killed his own son, but his mistress as well. Richard had always remained amazed at what a few well-placed blood splatters and a handful of fake emails can do to turn the tide of a police investigation. As Richard raced toward the van, he reprimanded himself for not soundproofing it as he had done with the shed. There were so many of those things out there these days that it was hard to find time for anything else. He knew that he had to get to the van quickly and silence the thing within, or his work would likely end that day. If anyone heard the noses oming from within and came investigating, they would not understand. Richard threw open the van doors and saw the woman cowering in the dark depths of the cavernous vehicle. She stared up at him in shock and screamed, a scream distorted into a moan of terror and bewilderment through her broken jaw. As Richard neared her, she sank even further into the darkness, a small, dead child cradled in her arms. Richard grabbed her right arm and yanked her to her feet, the dead weight wrapped in pink cloth falling from her arms to the metal floor with a dull thud. Her look of horror intensified as she looked down at her child. Richard heard her moan something, possibly Jessica, as she stared down at the unmoving lump of flesh on the floor. Richard had to drag the now silent woman the short distance back to the shed. Richard paused mere feet from the shed as a shock of horror raced down his spine. The shed door stood open before him, and he could clearly see that the monster was gone before he had time to think. Richard was struck on the head from behind. The air reverberated with a sharp metallic clang as steel met skull. White-hot pain raked through Richard's head as he fell to the ground. He felt strong hands grasp his shoulders as he drifted into unconsciousness. Slowly, the light came back to Richard's world. He knew immediately where he was. The shed. Richard tried to stand up, to get to his feet, but his body would not comply. Richard lay on the floor for what seemed an eternity, trying to regain his senses, to get his muscles working again with great effort. Richard lifted his right hand to his throbbing head. There suddenly came a sharp laugh from over Richard as a dark shadow moved. He heard a brief whoosh. Then a searing pain shot through his head. Once again, as Richard lay on the cold floor, blood beginning to pool around him, he saw two dark figures looming over him. The smaller held a small, pink object cradled in its arm, the other holding what Richard recognized as his shovel. The laughing began again as the larger figure clumsily raised the shovel over its head, the weapon almost falling out of its grasp. Richard shook his head, trying to regain his senses, trying to get to his feet so that he could defend himself. He couldn't move quickly, no, couldn't avoid what was to come. The shovel came down. Blackness engulfed Richard. Story 2, SS Yongala. The tropical waters were warm, even on a night dive, but Aaron still wore a wetsuit. He switched head on the video camera attached to his mask, then pressed the start button on his waterproof wristwatch. 70-0 popped up in black against a staunch gray background, and quickly turned to 69-59, then 69-58, 69 to 57, the countdown had begun. He pressed the diving mask tight against his face and splashed into the water. The glow from the waning moon disappeared within seconds, too weak to penetrate the deep waters of the sea. Aaron's excitement was heightened by the rich darkness. Ghosts were always more active at night. Time stood still below the water's surface, where darkness expanded endlessly in every direction. Bubbles rose from Aaron's mask as he exhaled, taking one last look at the bottom of his boat. He shined a flashlight into the void beneath his feet. What he was looking for lay cloaked in darkness, 70 feet below on the seabed, and it was time to start his descent. Aaron relieved the pressure on his eardrums continuously as he sank into the dark bluish haze. It took only seconds to reach a depth of 40 feet. If he was on target, the deck of the SS Yongala should be visible beneath him, but there was only blue in every direction. He swam in small zigzags, waiting for the ghost ship to emerge from the darkness. Something bumped Aaron's leg. He dropped the flashlight and turned toward the cold grass to see a dark shadow looming. She beside him. Wide-eyed and frightened, he tried to scream, jetting the regulator from his mouth while violently kicking to escape the creature. As the shadow moved away, Aaron looked into the darkness, SS after it, behind him, in front, above, below. It could be anywhere. He became aware of a burning in his lungs, and the panic increased. Reaching up and over with his right arm, he searched for the regulator, finally bumping his hand against a long hose that he pulled to his lips. Salt water invaded his mouth while he pressed the purge valve before taking a life-giving breath. Shivering with fear, Aaron retrieved the flashlight from its long cord and pointed it into the gloom. An enormous grouper hovered a few feet away, investigating the invader to its territory. Aaron's muscles relaxed. Not only was this hulking fish harmless, it was also a sign he was close to the artificial reef created by the wreckage of the Yongala. He followed the slow-moving fish, fanning his flashlight back and forth beneath him. 57 to 18. A chill ran up Aaron's spine when an enormous shape materialized in the void. The hollow remains of the majestic passenger ship loomed in front of him, concealed in corals and shadow. The gravesite of 122 souls lost at sea over 100 years ago. Aaron checked the full-spectrum camera, EVP recorder, and the EMF meter on his belt. The familiar feeling of adrenaline coursed through his veins, driving him on. This was what he came for. Aaron swam over the coral-encrusted skeleton of rusted window frames where tiny silverfish darted in and out of the darkness. He used landmarks along the ship in search of his destination. The aft mast, the engine room, and the galley were all visible before an inky black chasm near TH. Ebo appeared in the distance, the entrance to the front cargo hold, site of the only evident bones from the shipwreck. Aaron thrust forward eagerly and entered the forbidden remains of the SS Yongala where the wide ocean void was replaced by flaky walls of eroded steel. His hands were steady as he checked the EMF meter. The lights still glowed green. Nothing yet. 55 minutes and 23 seconds. Aaron began his sweep of the room. He needed to save at least 10 minutes for a safe ascent, and the clock was ticking. Most of the contents within the cargo hold had long ago turned to sludge. The ground crawled with crustaceans and slithering sea snakes. But no matter how many times Aaron trekked back and forth, he saw no sign of human remains. His search continued so long, he began to worry the reports of bones might be a farce. He kept his breathing steady while methodically scanning the floor. Just when Aaron made up his mind to quit the cargo hold to search elsewhere, an unnaturally straight object reflected off the beam of light. He drew closer and saw a knob on the end of it. It must be the famed femur bone reported by divers before him. The adrenaline rush returned, and he kicked toward the hum, and remains without hesitation. Taking advantage of his buoyancy, he hovered several feet over the femur bone while checking his equipment. It would be difficult to discern ghostly voices on an underwater recording, especially over the rumbling of his regulator, but he clicked on the EVP recorder anyway. The EMF meter was still in the green, so he brought the full spectrum camera to his face. Aaron took a dozen pictures of the femur bone and its surroundings, then shined the light in every direction to take pictures of the entire cargo hold. The pitch blackness of confinement impeded his flashlight, allowing less illumination than the infinite blue of the open sea. In the darkness he waited. Ghost hunting was about patience, and he had been to enough haunts without sight or sound of a ghost for hours that he was well practiced in tenacity. 42 to 28, the EMF lights blinked yellow. Aaron looked around expectantly, excited to get an alarm so quickly, but he was alone. The yellow lights turned back to green. 40 minutes and 2 seconds. A scratching sound reverberated through the water. Aaron could not sense which direction it came from. 36 minutes and 18 seconds. Aaron grew restless. He worried his dangerous descent had been in vain. 32 to 43. The EMF blipped yellow again, but only for a moment. 20 minutes left. The Angala groaned, its steel frame protesting against the watery grave. It was followed by a childlike cry for help. Aaron's skin tingled, and he swung the flashlight around, catching nothing but blackness. He stared down at the EMF meter, but it had gone dead. He knocked the side of it with his flashlight, trying to coax it to life with a burst of radiance. A dozen red pinprick lights flickered in the dark. Warmth vanished from the water, leaving it icy cold. Aaron saw nothing supernatural with his naked eye, but still snapped dozens of pictures, hoping a glowing human figure or mystical ring of light would show up when he developed the Nagat. Ives in the dark room, 20 for 12. The nauseating sensation of listing from one side to the other seized him. Childish cries for help came from every direction, and Aaron's blood chilled to He core. Despite his experience, Aaron's courage faltered. The EMF meter cranked back up, flashing red lights this time. Dread overcame him, and he headed for the hole in the deck, looking back one last time toward the abandoned bone. In the darkness, a pale face wavered like white silk in a breeze. Aaron stopped his ascent and grabbed the camera. This could be irrefutable proof of a haunting, guaranteeing him recognition in the ghost hunting community. The face disappeared in seconds, but Aaron hovered near the exit. Now that he was closer to his escape route, he felt safe and decided to stay a few more minutes. The sight of a ghost had reinvigorated him, but the lights on the EMF meter went green, and the temperature of the tropical waters warm. Shadows moved in the darkness. But when Aaron pointed his flashlight toward each anomaly, he saw only local sea creatures swimming past. A group of spotted manta rays glided overhead just beyond the gaping hole of the cargo hold load, causing a wavering in the still water. Aaron pointed his flashlight on their white undersides, watching the graceful undulation of their wings as they passed. 13:03. Time to leave De Sapo. Hinted that 10 minutes passed and he had seen no more signs of the supernatural. Aaron took a final look around the cargo hold. He swept the darkness with his flashlight one last time, then conceded his defeat and swam toward the gaping exit above. Aaron jerked in surprise when light flooded the chamber. The temperature plummeted, and in his shock he missed the exit, hitting his head on the splintering roof. He blinked against the jolt of pain, then saw clearly the cargo hold as it was in 1911, with over 100 passengers crouched on the floor in fear. The Yongala listed severely, groaning as it swayed side to side. Aaron floated over the scene, an observer over the impossible vision of these doomed passengers, hiding from a storm in the bowels of their ship. Wails and crying filled his ears, echoing like the hollow sound of waves in a conch shell. Vertigo ripped through Aaron's senses. He couldn't tell whether he was seeing the ghost ship or the real Yongala, aiming for what he hoped was the exit. Aaron kicked against the freezing water, trying to escape the pleas for help below him. Time was running out. He burst into the warmth of the open sea, and the sight of blue and yellow fish swimming through the gently waving fingers of a white coral brought him back to his senses. 7:20. Back in the open sea. Speed was the enemy. He must ascend slowly to avoid the pressure change tearing his lungs to shreds, so he pushed his fears deep inside to be dealt with later. Aaron kicked gently against the water, watching the wreckage of the Yongala disappear beneath his feet. He kept an eye on his depth gauge, fighting the urge to spread to the surface. Aaron hovered at 15 feet, his final safety stop, watching the timer to make sure he stayed a full 5 minutes. His heart had slowed to normal. The world returned to what it should be, and with nothing to occupy him but his thoughts, Aaron's mood shifted from fear to excitement. All of his equipment was intact, and he felt sure of proving the wreck was haunted. 3:23. With a final farewell to the deep blue beneath his feet, Aaron kicked toward the surface. He looked up, expecting the Marquis-shaped underside of his boat to come into view, but instead he saw the pearled, smoky form of a 120-foot ghost ship hovering overhead. His EMF meter shook free of its own cord, floating to his face and reflecting a dozen blinking red lights across his mask. The phantom Yongala capsized in the calm water, struck by an invisible wave, and descended upon Aaron. Water whirlpool, in an indomitable current, dragging him relentlessly toward the sea floor. The enormous pressure in his chest and ears was crippling, and a rush of cold water accosted him as the ghost's hip crashed into its 100-year-old remains and disappeared, leaving Aaron alone at the bottom of the ocean. 22. Aaron sat on the deck of the SS Yongala, 65 feet down, breathing his thin gasp of air. If he rose to the surface, the pressure would tear through the soft tissue of his lungs, and he would die in agony alone on his boat. It was better to stay here, he aced the waterproofing clasp on the EVP recorder, flooding its electronic insides with salt water, then popped open the film canister of his camera. The red sweep hand of the oxygen tank meter slipped to zero, and behind the plastic shield of his mask, Aaron's eyes filled with fear as he looked one last time at the endless expanse of blue overhead. The regulator slipped silently from his mouth. Story 3. Late night metal, iron, pure metal. I attempted to reopen my vigorously locked eyes. What? Eyelids finally reopening. They were immediately stabbed with the merciless onslaught of darkness. Nothing but a fuzzy, incomprehensible world of emptiness in front of me. What my only thought as I sluggishly regained my conscience. Not a single idea could have dared to enter my mind, except this one word. Seconds pass, and soon I was able to accept the world I was presented with as I tried to make sense of why my entire face was screaming in agony, why my lungs were cooperating as they pierced my chest in anger, and why this putrid taste of viscous liquid was in my mouth. What my head was pounding immensely to just stop. I spat out my blood and began drawing heavy and painful breaths. If there is so much oxygen here, why do I have none? Trying to regain composure, I felt it. Every last nerve shot itself in my face. All at once the blood poured in through the veins and told my body to suffer. I think I understood I was struck with something, surely. What other reason could there be? But how? Logic finally making its way back into existence. I attempted to reason with the terms I had been given. Despite my throbbing brain wrecking my attempts at clear thought, I forced myself to collect information. I was in a room. Did I know this place? The color, dark turquoise. It was familiar. I was in a room. Now, surveying more thoroughly, I came upon the realization that this was no ordinary room. It was mine. I had to have been in my own house. All right, that appeared simple enough. But then, what happened? No other person was in the room besides me. Everything appeared to be normal. I studied every inch of the room, looking for something that may have struck me. I looked upward, downward, then under the bed, then the closet. What happened? Minutes flew by, and I still could not make any connection as to how I was put into that situation. Several more minutes no longer existed. Still no idea. After a myriad of ticking and talking, a myriad of scavenging through every last amount of space in the room, I found it. It was a box, and according to its features, it was my assailant. In the dark of the room, moonlight glistened and sparkled on a little rectangular box. It was shrouded in dust and produced a light yet musty odor. It was nothing more than a mahogany box with a lock of silver, and it hardly looked like its contents would be of any worth. I could not remember ever seeing this box before, let alone receiving it or using it. The questions I imposed next were the obvious, but unanswered. What was it doing here? And what's inside the box? Of course, I had no way of coming up with an explanation, so I suppose I just had to leave it at that. But that didn't mean that I didn't want to know. Upon further inspection of the box, I unconsciously ended up remembering what had taken place before the incident. I was sleeping, or rather, I was tormented. I vividly recalled emotions of terror and an unparalleled attack of dread and horror. It was nothing, absolutely nothing like I had ever felt before. My body was chained in paralysis as I endured the utmost disgusting and horrific experience ever conjured. The details were minute. I could see make any rational thought as to what occurred other than the fact that there was nothing but hopelessness, fear, and misery. I suppose none of that really mattered. What mattered to me was figuring out what was going on. I had my mind set. I was going to draw a conclusion and get my answer. The only way I was going to be satisfied, I began formulating. I drew vague interpretations of the events and fitted them together like puzzle pieces. My mind was scrambling with meticulous intrigue. A minute or so passed, and methought, G. My eyes shot open and grew into the size of golf balls. My nerves sprang and leapt everywhere throughout my body. I lost all sense of thought. All myself began melting into panic. Sweat began protruding from the burning of my skin. I could hear something behind me, heavier now, deep, low, and grunting, panting, almost breathing, its all-encompassing authority. Why threw my heart into an infinite, an ending abyss of dysphoria, body not yet taken to trembling, but soon it grew more intense, louder. It was bombarding my ears with putridity. The skin on the back of my neck could almost feel the warmth as the intensity blasted evermore. Sheer terror ran its course in my skin, every last hair standing erect, taut like strings on a gate. No coherent thought made its way into my mind. What? I painstakingly forced myself to swallow my soul and throw my head around to face my tormentor. It felt as though every muscle sprained itself as I thrashed my head toward the breathing. Terrified, I was struck with unrelenting realization of my circumstances. My heart collapsed with fear when I put it all together again. Nothing was behind me. It had to be. It couldn't be. The box, even though T was right in front of me, the grunting and heaving could not have any other possible source except for that box. What else? What else could have caused the breathing? It couldn't have been any more than a few inches in length, not a clue as to the minimal size of its width. No, it was too small. Please. Unwillingly, the words were forced out my mouth. My tongue let low sound, perhaps in attempt to dispel the vile grunting. The words hardly took shape. They were gnarled and bent as they were released from my sticky, dry, and blood-stained mouth. This plead would do no good, so I thought, as if the box could hear me. The breathing that plagued me came to an unnerving halt. No other sound passed. It was devoid of life. Silence. My chest still ready to burst from my exploding heart. I scooped the box up and rushed to the trash cans outside. I chucked it into the can, smashed the lid shut, and that was the end of it. In the dark of that night, I lay in bed trying to erase my memory of the events that transpired earlier. The soothing warmth and soft hug of the blanket wrapped around me brought comfort. I was drenched in weariness and let my eyes close. Thoughts of my childhood flashed before me, times of youth and wonder, playing in the snow when I was younger. It had always been nostalgic to watch my neighbors' children building snowmen and hurling snowballs at one another. My brother and I would race each other down the hills around our neighborhood. I lost nearly every time, but that didn't stop me. An ocean and of euphoria enveloped me. I was caressed by the imaginary sound of snow boots crunching on the snow. Light tufts and sprinkles of white dancing. waltzing about in the cool air. Every bit of my essence was embraced in bliss. What I would have done to go back to, my heart stopped all at once, then began to accelerate painfully. My soul galvanized in panic, a deep and low grunting I could hear it again. Shock flooded my body and spiked my nerves into a maddening confusion. All my euphoric thoughts were wiped out of existence, crushed like bugs trying to celebrate. All I could focus on was that heaving H-G-G-H-H-H-G. The luminous bellow grew in the night as I became petrified. My body acted on its own. I was thrashed out of my bed and ran for the light switch. The reassurance of the light chasing out the evil of ebony quelled my spirit, but not for long. The vicious grunting never ceased. It droned on, endlessly filling the room with a demonic prison. See, where was that box? It had to be disposed of. I threw around every last piece of furniture in desperation to find that dreaded box. Violent and wicked thoughts were shoved into my mind. They destroyed every last bit of happiness I had. I couldn't stand it. I had to end this torture. I searched for so long I forgot time existed altogether. Each and very waking moment was filled with the monotonous moaning and misery of the breathing. It swelled and appalled my ears with dissonance and discourse. I searched for so long I forgot time existed altogether. That box struck me ill with disconcerting feelings of plume and peril. It would not get away with it. Practically hurling the drawers out of their place, I scrambled about in order to find the box. I checked every drawer on the top. I checked every drawer in the middle. Lastly, I checked every drawer on the bottommost section, and my eyes were assaulted with the presence of the disgusting box. The breaths grew more ominous and more voluminous. Their power threatened my sanity. I couldn't endure any more of their horror. Once again I could feel the heat of the breath on the back of my neck as I inspected the box once more. My skin nearly peeled itself from my body in fear. The throbbing of the blood rushing through my body was electricity itself. This box had to be opened. At this point, I couldn't have cared less what was inside. I was going to open it and destroy it immediately. That was it. I clasped the silver lock into my hands and pulled with my every being. It wouldn't budge. There was no use in using this kind of force. Using my head, I figured I could use something else instead. Box in hand, sweat streamed down my face as I flew through hall and sprinted towards the garage. The breathing was chased me as I made my way towards the door. It wouldn't let me escape. Its warmth on my neck still fresh and rank. I threw the door open savagely and with urgency, my invisible pursuer of sound still following. I scurried without thought to the workbench and snatched the item I intended to use, bolt cutters. Without hesitation, I got to work. The lock yelled out a hideous, clangorous abomination that invaded my soul as I snapped the lock's grip away. The box was finally open. Without further delay, the breathing no longer possessed the quality of panting, but then took the form of gasping in desperation. I understood immediately what the contents of the box were to be used for. I marveled at the sight of the object within the box and took it out. My opposer instigated he to action. The perpetual shrieking of the uneven rhythm, the laboring, harsh, and punctuated agony of the gasping would soon perish. I tasted it once more. The metallic, acrid flavor penetrated my tongue. All tensions subsided. My soul was at ease. I took one final action. There was an immensely bright flash. Iron, pure metal, warm, wet blood. Story for the wall. A few months ago we bought a new house. It was just down the road from our old house, but it seemed way more remote, and I only had 3 neighbors. It was a beautiful wooden house, very old, with 2 acres of land. The house itself, 1 acre, and a pond of 1 acre. I previously never got to see the inside of the house, but because the land was so spacious and it had a large barn perfect for working on my dangerous experiments, I begged my dad to buy it. We did, and now I finally get to tour the inside of the house. It wasn't very big, but I liked it. I walked through all the rooms. I chose an upstairs room because I've always wanted an upstairs room. The rest of my family chose rooms too. But this was a 5-bedroom house, and we had for family members, and my mom and dad would sleep together. 1 extra upstairs bedroom would be converted into a guest room, but there was 1 room that didn't get chosen. I had never been in there before. As soon as I stepped in the room, a sudden heaviness overcame me. The air felt so stagnant and heavy. There was no window in the room. It had a low ceiling, and it seemed like it was more of a storage room than a bedroom. It had a ankle fan, each blade painted a colorful color: blue, red, yellow, green, and orange. I assumed that this used to be a child's bedroom. I really felt apprehensive about that room, and I didn't want to go back in there. That night we moved in. My room was comfortable and repainted a wonderful shade of blue. My old room used to be lavender, but as I grew older, I started hating the color for many reasons. It was a childish color, and also lavender is a color that has been shown to cause depression in some. I fell asleep rather easily in my new room. It felt quite cozy. I woke you. Suddenly in the middle of the night, I heard children's laughter and a lullaby. My brother often plays creepy games in the night, so I just went back to sleep. The next morning, my parents were out. Out of curiosity, I went to the stuffy room. I didn't notice something before. Instead of white paint covering the wall, it was wallpaper. Seeing no need of it now, I tore a sheet of the wallpaper off. Underneath was a pastel-colored wall with floral designs on it. Peeling the rest of the wallpaper off, I noticed that all 4 of the walls were painted a different pastel color, and the floral pattern circled the room. Drawings of several children playing appeared on one wall, 3 of them more prominent than the others. They were very nicely drawn. The previous owner must have been an artist. Here and there were crayon marks on the walls. I took a brush and scrubbed them off. This was a children's room. When my parents got home, I pointed out the paint job. They seemed happy with it, so it was left as is. I decided to do some research on this house. I Googled my address. A Wikipedia page popped up. I clicked on the link, and the images on the sea showed a grainy old picture of a man, a woman, and 3 children. The children could not have been more than 3 in the picture. I read the article. George Ashford first built this home in 1926, planning a long marriage with his soon-to-be wife, Elena Cooper. They built this house in hopes of having many children and raising them to be successful. George Ashford worked as a painter and earned a living making portraits that sold for over $1,000 apiece. In 1928, Ashford finally married Elena Cooper, who then became Elena Ashford. In 1929, they had fraternal triplets, Harvey Ashford, Julia Ashford, and Allison Ashford. The Ashford family went smoothly until one day in 1934, George and Elena got in a violent fight. Elena had then ran into her room, locked the door, and hung herself. Then the kids, who witnessed the entire fight and had ran to Elena's room and hid under the bed, then went to their room, old enough to process what had happened. All three of them committed suicide themselves. Allison hit her head very hard on the floor, causing severe brain damage. Julia found a blade under a cabinet and cut herself, and she bled. Death. Harvey electrocuted himself. George, suffering from the suicide of 4 family members, was now alone. He apparently painted a picture of his 3 children in their room, playing Boo. The paintings were never found. He painted a commemorative painting on an easel of his wife. He wrote a note explaining what had happened and dropped it in a mailbox of one of his neighbors, RS, and kept alongside his painting with its own note. He added a 3rd suicide note and proceeded to drown himself. He was found by his neighbors a day later. The house still remains today. I stared at my computer in disbelief. We had moved into a suicide site. I pulled open another web page with the more recent details about the house. And what does the article mean when they say the paintings were never found? They are right there under the wallpaper. I guess George Ashford must have changed his mind at the last minute and then covered the entire room with wallpaper. He must have also painted several children before then, too, because there were definitely more than 3 children playing. House last owned 1934, renovated and repainted 2011, old mid-2012. This was a very old house. The last owners were the Ashfords themselves. I found it disturbing. I now live in a suicide site. What time is it? I lost track of the time. It is past midnight now. I didn't think I was on the computer that long. I decided to call it a night. As I got to bed again, I heard the giggling and the lullaby again. I wondered if the children never left, and the giggling is coming from there. Ghosts. I decided not to worry much, as even if they were ghosts, they are still children and can't do much harm. The next night I had a thought. I once again Googled my address, but this time I added the word hunting to it. A list of sites came up. All of them had the same suicide story, but some had one more important piece of data. Children anywhere from age 8 to 18 were seen playing around the house and then suddenly disappearing without a trace. It has been noted that only the kids that wander in the house disappear. For that reason, the house was condemned for 20 years, but that didn't stop kids from exploring it. In the 1990s, the disappearances stopped, and it started declining in popularity. Since then, no kidnappings have been recorded. In 2010, the county started renovations on it and plan to sell it to new owners soon. I found a few pictures of some of the missing children and printed them out. I put them in my pocket for later examination. I went to bed pretty late with the giggling still there. Is it my imagination, or is the giggling getting louder? Each night I woke up late into the evening. It was about 5 in the evening, and my parents were out. I decided to wait until they came home, and then I'd eat. So I just sat at my computer and watch a few movies. They finally came home at 9. When I came down, my dad had a stern look on his face. You could have at least cleaned up, we're already so busy cleaning up the house and putting things where they should be. And now you make an enormous mess in the kitchen. Clean it up now. Also, you are wasting food. I just stared blankly at him, and he messed. There were pots and pans on the counter, flour scattered everywhere, eggs broken on the floor, and more mess that I didn't make all over the place. But, Dad, I didn't do this, I exclaimed, I swear. Now I really made him mad. You know I can't tolerate lying. Now clean up this mess. Now, I don't lie. I can't believe he thought I was lying. Can't you at least help me clean up? Honest, I didn't do this. Big mistake, too. Say that. That tipped his scales. That's it. Either you are lying now, or you are so unobservant you didn't notice a break eye, and both things are bad. Go to the storage room. Now, the storage room. No, not there of all places. I shouted, I'll go to my room, just not the storage room. He just laughed. Ed, with your video games, laptop, and other entertainment up there. No, you have to learn a lesson. A small lie is just as bad as a big lie to me. Go to the storage room. 1, 2, 3. He came up to me, grabbed my arm, and dragged me to the storage room. It was empty, except for a few boxes. He tossed me in there and locked me in. I quickly turned on the light. I gasped. All the painted Kyle Dran's eyes were staring at me. Not in the way those pictures with the eyes that seem to follow you do, but they were staring right through me. It wasn't like this before. Dad, please let me out. I'm sorry, I moaned. No, I won't take the obvious bait. I looked at the door and then back at the paintings. All of them now carried a smile. I screamed and started banging at the door. If you make one more sound, I'll trip the breaker to that room and you won't have any light, he yelled. I heard a lullaby. It was a pretty clear lullaby, but it sounded tinny, like one of those little old-fashioned music boxes. I tried to keep quiet, but I couldn't help to whimper. I got up and tried to find a way out. The only way out would be the air duct, but I couldn't reach it, and the boxes weren't sturdy enough to stand on. Then the giggling started. It came from all directions. I tried not to scream. Something cold touched me. I accidentally let out a scream. I covered my mouth. The papers fell out of my pocket. I only had seconds to observe them. Before I could gasp, the lights went out. I started screaming and banging on the door, frantically flipping the light switch to no avail. He was completely ignoring me. This is too much. The lullaby and the giggling grew louder and louder. The last thing I heard was, come play with us. But to play with us, you have to be with us before everything was black. 10 years later, the house is finally being sold again. Our moving van pulled the last load from the house, never to see it again. It was too big of a house. Anyways, the new owners have a kid about my age. That is a huge relief to me. It was getting lonely being the only teenager on this wall. Story 5. I'm a glutton, you know. W. That feeling you get when you eat too much, that uncomfortable pressure that just makes your throat feel like a pipe ready to burst. I wish I could feel that stuffed full. I've never said the words, I can't eat another bite. I always could, bite after bite after bite. 12 plates of pasta and sausage at one Italian place. Open and close a buffet on my days off, and still wrap up the night with 3 full ice cream cakes. It didn't matter how much I ate. I'd stuff my face until my stomach ached, but still it wanted more. Now I know what you're thinking. How do I even fit in the car? Hell, how do I even type with hams? For hands, I'm skinny as a rail, a sickly-looking 120. A stiff breeze would kill me, snap me like a reed. It's as if my belly was a furnace that burned everything up before it could be of any use. When I was younger and on my parents' insurance, I got tested for everything you could imagine. 3 different types of tapeworms, parasites, with names you can't pronounce, clean as a whistle. They checked me into a baker's dozen, health clinics, each one with an eating disorder specialist that was sure they knew the cow. S.E. None did, and in the end, my mom and Dad gave up, made me get a part-time job as soon as could, though, to help with the grocery budget. That part-time job became a full-time job that stretched. 20 years I work at a plant that produces those takeout containers for restaurants. You know the ones. Generic white styrofoam or plastic with the cheap lids. I know it sounds weird, but sometimes while I was pressing them down through the shaper, I felt like them, those empty bowls waiting to be filled only to be empty again. I identify with those containers even more when I come home after work. There are so many that wait for me, empty of the Chinese takeout, of the pizza, drained of the fries and burgers. They stack up from floor to ceiling, spill out from the table, and depile in heaps on the floor. I've got to wade through a sea of wrappers just to make it to the couch. I ended up in a dump with them, tossed away. My parents haven't spoken to me in years. I can't even tell you why. Honestly, my morning routine never changes. Get up and fry a dozen eggs in my fire hazard of a kitchen, stop at a biscuit place, and pick up my usual order. I've got them, thinking the 6 combo meals are for me and my coworkers. They don't even make to the parking lot. Lunch, I've off down to subs. Lunch is the worst. Not long enough to go get something and come back. Though sometimes I deal with the bullshit from the floor manager and take my time, then head home for a dinner that takes all night to finish. Sometimes I start at 6 and don't stop until midnight. Most of my paycheck goes to my stomach. That was my everyday up until I met Audrey. She was the new office girl in charge of order fulfillment, blonde with reddish highlights, a daijo, be but a good one. In her 40s it would turn out, but a 40s that would make most women jealous. She always smelled like strawberry hand sanitizer. We just clicked. She'd only been there 2 days before. We were texting after work, jokes and cat memes at first, but soon we took lunch together, then a few dinners. I always left those smiling and starving, tears in my eyes fro, and the pangs of hunger twisting up my guts. Audrey was like a ray of sunshine. I never smiled more than when she'd call me out of the blue to chat about her day. We didn't have days off together very often, so she'd check in on her breaks. I would sit there and listen as she vented about the ordering department screwing up yet another file, munching on the odd roach that would scurry be. Why, it was on one of our rare days off together that she called in sobbing. She told me her mother had had a stroke and she had to leave right away. It was a 6-hour drive. I told her I load be right there, pick her up in my car. She grew silent. You ever watch recordings of bombs going off? Like the nuclear test site footage. Remember how quiet it gets right before the bomb explodes? That's what her silence was like. I waited. She took a breath. Then the boom. She needed me to watch her baby. I was stunned. We'd been dating official over 3 weeks now, and this was the first she'd ever mentioned having a kid. She apologized and rambled. It had been a bad split from her ex. She wanted to tell me, but couldn't find the right time. I asked her how she'd managed to go on our dates. Sometimes they were spur of the moment runs to the pizza shop she liked. Turns out her babysitter lived in the apartment next door, that she was gone on some school trip this week. Why not take the baby with her? Her parents didn't know. They hadn't wanted her to get married in the first place. I got the feeling there was a lot more there, but I couldn't stand to hear the pain in her voice anymore, so I told her the truth. It was all right. I didn't care if she had a kid. I'd be over at her place as soon as I could. She told me she loved me. At that moment, I wouldn't have cared if she had a dozen kids. Her place was small and on the top floor of a brownstone walk-up. I was a little out of breath by the time I made it inside, and my stomach did a little spasm. Audrey was a whirlwind of emotion and frantic action. I'll be back as soon as I know she's okay. She showed me the living room and pointed out her bedroom. He's in there taking a nap. He is a doll, really. I asked her how old he was. He'll be a year old next month. She looked into my eyes. You okay? I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but she let it hang in the air between us. It's okay. I love you. Go see your mom. I'll watch little. What's his name? I realized I never asked. Tommy. He'll wake up in an hour or two. Just went down. Bottles are in the fridge. She gave me a hug and a rushed kiss as she made her way out the door. I forgot to go shopping. Help yourself to whatever you want. She locked the door behind her. As soon as the lock clicked, I started tearing through the cabinets. That quiver in my stomach had grown to a full quake. Gurgles of stomach acid started to creep up my throat. I opened a box of oatmeal and swallowed mouthfuls whole. There wasn't much at all. She had a few things of ramen and a bottle of pasta sauce besides the box of noodles. I rummaged through the fridge and found a stick of butter, 3 old-looking micro carrots next to some questionable spring mix. That was it, other than the 6 bottles of milk on the top shelf. It was going to be a long 6 hours. I want to say why that I held out for a while before drinking the sauce, cold to chase down the slimy vegetables. It had only been an hour. I boiled the noodles into a soup with the butter and ate them by our 2. That was when Tommy woke up. He was a cute little guy, had his mother's blue eyes. He was probably pretty confused to see me, and I scooped him up out of his crib. We had something in common, Oh, he was hungry too. I cooed and danced him up and down a bit while I got a bottle ready. He went to town on that thing, drained half in record time. I figured I'd put on something bright and colorful for him while he ate. Ended up on some cartoon. Tommy seemed to like it. He wasn't crying his head off like other babies. He was a doll, just like Audrey said. We sat there, him next to me on a little pillow I found. He smiled when I tickled his feet. This wasn't so bad. Before long I tuned out the mindless cartoon and ended up falling asleep. I woke up to two things: Tommy crying his head off and my whole body aching. The fire in my stomach had spread through my whole body. My teeth ached and I felt thinner. I mean thinner. My hands were skeletal, and I knew if I pulled up my shirt I could count my ribs. The apartment was full of shadows due to the setting sun. I'd been out for hours. I tried to pick the little guy up to calm him down, but I felt a wave of dizziness, like I'd been on a tilt-a-whirl. I fumbled out my phone. Audrey had texted me that she'd arrived and her mom was in the ICU. I sent her love and an update that me and Tommy were fine. My fingers trembled as I pressed against the screen. I forced myself off the sofa. I opened the fridge and drained one of the bottles. Then another and another. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. I felt my organs shift and a sharp stab shot through my chest. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and one thought filled my mind. This was it. I was dying. I was actually starving to death. I don't know where the energy came from, but I went back through the kitchen until I came across the tin of formula. I tore off the lid and buried my face in the cloud of powdered milk. I choked and sputtered, coughed out as much as I managed to get down my throat. Tommy kept crying. I crawled my way back to the couch and tried to calm him down, but he wasn't having it. The closer I got, the better. He smelled those sweet, milk-fed, pink skin so soft. I could feel great gobs of saliva run down my lips, felt them mix with the powder into a sticky paste. I wrapped my bony hands around his wide body to pick him up, to calm him down. Just to calm him down a little. Audrey came home around noon the next day. She looked haggard, but opened the door with a smile on her face and a box of pizza in her hand. I met her in the entryway. Her mother had made it through the worst of it. They'd even managed to have a chat before she left. She asked how Tommy was and why there was white stuff all over my shirt. I laughed and explained that the kid could eat, had to make him some new formula. He'd gone down right after lunch. Speaking of Lou, NCH, she held up the pizza and opened it up. Supreme, my favorite. Hungry, I felt my lips pull back in a smile. No, I told her. I'm finally full. Story 6, Mies Kalun's Mobile Cinema. Whether a precocious elementary schooler or a senior waiting to leave for college, all of us kids in Plainfield found ourselves counting down the days until Mescaloon's Mobile Cinema rolled back into town. There were advertisements for it posted anywhere, especially not the public notice boards at the library or the town hall. Nor were particular return dates announced after the last screening, nor did the mobile cinema have a set schedule by which to calibrate our internal clocks. We would always learn of its return from a rumor. Somebody would mention hearing of a showing to town's over, meaning our turn would come tomorrow night, or else someone would have heard on good authority from a friend of a friend that Plainfield would be the next town on the circuit, making next weekend the one we'd all been waiting for, and sure enough, one of those rumors would be true. We'd gather in the fields at the edge of town, and there would be Mr. Mescaloon himself, dressed in age, his tattered top hat and patchwork tuxedo, standing outside the modified trailer that contained the rarest movie house in the world. We would enter through the back of the trailer. If we were one of the lucky few to be admitted inside, the trailer contained a few rows of metal folding chairs welded to the floor, with a narrow aisle stretching down the middle. The chairs faced a stark white wall onto which a projector dangling from the ceiling would beam whatever film Mr. Maskelyne had to show us. They were always worth seeing, every one, because you could see nothing like them anywhere else. Maybe we were biased, since Plainfield didn't have a movie theater of its own, or a roller rink, or an arcade, or anywhere else for kids to go for entertainment. Our parents weren't big on such things. All the same, long after some of us had left Plainfield for greener pastures and had seen the kinds of movies everybody else had enjoyed, we had to admit that nothing was ever as exciting as the films of Mr. Maskelyne. We never knew exactly what to expect going in for a screening. Sometimes his films were no more than 10 minutes long. Others ran for over 3 hours. We could never recognize the actors and actresses on screen, partially because we never had the chance to learn about and grow enamored of movie stars through magazines and gossip rags, since anything not a textbook would be confiscated at school. Mostly, though, it was because Mr. Maskelyne's films used no professional actors. Maybe he picked them for their looks or for the sounds of their voices. Maybe his casting selections had no logic whatsoever. It didn't matter. The actors always showed real emotion in his films, no matter how large or small the role. You could tell they were giving it everything they had. You'd be forgiven for thinking they weren't faking. You could be sure of only one thing when you sat down to watch one of Mr. Maskelyne's films. Somebody was going to die. Their death wouldn't always be gory. Sure, there were the bloody ones, the machete to the skull, the 1,000 strategic cuts of the razor, the gunshot at close range. Sometimes they went cleanly, garroted by a masked figure, for instance, or left twitching in a chair after drinking a glass of something toxic. Whatever the method, no matter how creative, the film death would be more realistic than you could imagine, and so too would be the performance leading up to it, the tears, the pleas, the screams that we thought was the chief virtue of Mr. Maskelyne's films. How real they were, how true they were, having endured the blandness and falsehood of the whitewashed novels and television shows our parents forced on us. It felt as if we were seeing the world as it was meant to be seen for the first time in our lives. It was like being born or reborn. We were all grateful to Mr. Maskelyne for it. We greeted the end of each film with a standing ovation, and Mr. Maskelyne, ever modest, would doff his grungy hat and give us a low bow. We never told our parents about Mr. Maskelyne, not only because it would entail revealing that we had sneaked out of our rooms at night and violated our curfews. We predicted that they'd claim he was the devil, like they had with our trading card games and fantasy anthologies, and prohibit us from ever visiting him again. He never charged us money for admission to his screenings. All he asked is that we enter his lottery To each kid he admitted into the trailer, he provided a paper raffle ticket with a handwritten number on it. Once the film ended and our applause subsided, he'd reach into his hat and fish around inside until his gloved hand emerged whole. Holding a slip of paper, he'd read the number in his quiet, soothing voice and check whether any of our tickets matched it. If none did, he would simply smile, shake hands with anybody who stayed behind to thank him for the show, and let us out into the moonlit fields, where the lingering crowd of the curious and admitted anxiously questioned us about what we had seen. For several years, we did not know what would happen if one held a matching ticket. Then there came the night when Chris P. won the drawing. Mr. Mescaloon reached into his hat like usual, and we scarcely paid attention, accustomed as we were to the slim odds of having the right number when he announced the winner. Half of us didn't even bother to glance at our tickets. Calm as ever, Mr. Mescaloon repeated the number. That was when Chris, sitting in the front row, raised his hand. It was as if lightning had struck us and melded us to our seats. This was something even more unprecedented than the films we came to see. We started clapping, and Chris stood and nodded to us politely as Mr. Mescaloon came over to congratulate him. All of us were eager to learn what Chris's prize would be. But Mr. M. Mescaloon sent us on our way, keeping only Chris behind. Some of us waited outside the trailer for a long time afterward, but nobody emerged. Given the late hour, we had to head home lest our family awaken and discover we weren't where we should have been. Chris's absence from school the following day surprised nobody. Who wouldn't take the day off after staying out so late? When he didn't appear the day after, we were perplexed. Once an entire week elapsed, we were downright curious. Even so, we didn't dare tell an adult what would become of the mobile cinema once they learned of it. For that matter, what would become of us? We didn't glimpse Chris again until the next time Mescaloon's mobile cinema parked in the outskirts of town. Those of us who gained entry waited eagerly for the projector to warm up and give us what we needed to see, and when it finally flickered to life, dust mote swirling and sparkling in its beam, we beheld none other than Chris P. on the screen before us. Sitting shirtless against a concrete wall, we erupted into thunderous applause. Our friend looked more alive on film than he ever had on the streets of Plainfield. He looked you at the camera and stared forward as if he were looking into each of our eyes. He knew who we were, after all. He knew we'd be there, watching, enjoying. We could feel that he dedicated this performance to us. He opened and closed his mouth a few times, tentatively, as though he had a monologue to recite, but couldn't remember any of his lines. After a few attempts, he clenched his jaw and fixed his gaze someplace beyond the camera. It was like he looked through us at that point, like we were transparent or like we were ghosts, like something that didn't exist anymore because we weren't real enough to be worth acknowledging. A shadow fell over the frame from the foreground, climbing up Chris's face. At first, he stayed expressionless, resigned or stoic or simply refusing to emote. Then a low rumbling burbled over the speakers. Soon it gave way to a loud, unmistakable whir, the sound of a readied chainsaw. The tears began to stream from Chris's eyes as if they had a life independent of him. In another minute, the rest of him had caught up, and his body began to shake as he broke into convulsive sobs. A figure wearing all black, with face obscured beneath a black ski mask, entered the frame. A chainsaw rattled in the figure's gloved hands. Chris regarded the newcomer and murmured something inaudible beneath the chains. AW's whine. The words weren't important anyway. He could have narrated a shopping list, and it would have seemed imbued with purpose and meaning and vitality. He had us riveted. The figure race had the chainsaw over Chris's head. Our friend closed his eyes, trembling. The blade lowered toward his neck. The figure feinted once, twice, then, in one powerful downward swing, the chainsaw bit end. Oh, Chris's spine, he yelped. But the sound was cut short as the blade did its work. His head flopped forward, then fell to the ground. The figure nudged it out of view, then left the screen. For a minute and a half, the camera lingered on the headless body. The pool of blood widening beneath it was the sole sign of movement. Then the camera cut to black. We could feel the realization percolating through us. What we beheld was no ordinary film, a scene that realistic could not have been faked. And gradually it dawned on us that Chris's screen debut was not the exception, but he ruled. Every film we had viewed at Mescaloon's Mobile Cinema documented the final moments of someone's life, and we understood the price we paid for coming to see it. We spent a few seconds figuring out how to react. We'd be lying if we said we hadn't been moved. Somebody began a hesitant clap, and shortly thereafter, everybody else joined. The applause fed on itself and grew. Some whistled, others cheered. We were all on our feet within a minute, and Mr. Mescaloon stood beside the movie screen and bowed and held out his hat for the lottery drawing. None of us were picked. Tea night, we all went out into the fields, into the crowd, and relayed what we had learned. We let the news settle over us like fog. We didn't talk about it, because there was nothing to say. Each of us mulled it over in our own personal silence. When we dispersed, all the stars in the sky glowed more brightly as we walked home. Not one of us has drawn the winning numbers since Chris P. all those years ago, but the night may yet come, because, even though we know the great secret of Mescaloon's Mobile Cinema, we have never missed a screening, and the crowd that gathers at the edge of town for a chance to see one of Mr. Mescaloon's films is larger every time he visits. Story 7. In between the static, there it is. In between the static, it's faint, at first buried deep in the hiss, but after you hear it, after you know it's there, it becomes so loud you want to cover your ears and scream. I can sound the words out for you, but that's it. We never got the romanization down. It sounds like IP tha coil pregaiad to desvego tet. There are images in the snow, ones beyond the bisected face, and black eyes that see in dimensions your scientist can only dream about. In the static, I've seen across the universe spindly stick figures with no noticeable head and arms that bow out, reach almost to their pointed feet. Diamond storms that rip the skin off ugly dog things scavenging. In a pure white desert, I've seen former colleagues from the mountain. I wonder if they were taken or given. Mull and Eggers dying slow asphyxiated deaths on the barely air of some blank and purple alien planet. Lots of experiments. June, Bledsoe, Schwartz, Candlow, Ronnie, others. Vivisection, of course, hours of it. No anesthetic. but they don't die or pass out. Dying is for later. Dying is for the bioweapon testing using diseases we shouldn't have had to worrying about encountering for centuries. Canlo was ripped apart by old, just a few airborne spores, and in days it was growing everywhere. Skin bulged, eyes bulged, couldn't close his mouth because it grew on his tongue. Then he just burst, blossomed into a bloody hill of deeply grooved fungi, gases, artificial gravity, abrasion tests, brain surgeries, amputations, organ transplants with strange creatures as donors. Unit 731 stuff, hours of experiments in the static, hours in minutes. They have this way of folding information, like a note folded into a tight square, but you can still read every inch of it. They bring He's static with them, radio and television. They don't have to. They do it on purpose. It's stimulus. I hear the hiss and start to cry. In the beginning, I used to lock down the house. I bought every kind of lock and bolt and chain I could, put them on the windows and door. A few times I boarded everything up, used my furniture to barricade any entry point. It's useless there. Fingers, they get through. They flatten, stretch, and slip through the cracks, long, thin worms that wrap around whatever's keeping them out. Sometimes they make me watch. Sometimes my cabin fills burning light. When it fades, I've lost time, and there they are, watching me Eventually I stopped. No more locks, no barricades. I just sit and wait. But not tonight. Tonight I'm making them work for it. When the static screams and the voice comes on, I don't think, just run to the door and slip outside. Finally wiping the tears from my eyes, I look up. Jesus, there's so many. Oh, F them, they don't look like they should fly. It's all weird angles and counterintuitive design. In space, it doesn't matter, I guess. Here, though, they should be falling out of the sky back at the mountain. We could use the internal tech, but the design was too radical. People would get suspicious. Things would change. Completely silent. They hover just barely visible against the gloom. I head for the woods. They've been here for a long time. We've gotten some things from them. Technology, mostly, obviously, but it's like beads for Manhattan. We always knew the we weren't in the driver's seat. Always knew how it would. And you've seen the things they can do, even if you don't realize it. They can level buildings like they're made of balsa wood. They slip in between. I don't know what to call it. Dimensions. Realities. They go and they rip the tiniest piece apart, and on our side the whole thing comes down. They can do it to whole cities. August 9th, 1945. That wasn't a bomb. That was simple mimicry. The last light of dusk is almost gone. I didn't bring a flashlight. I thought it would draw too much attention to me. Now I'm just barely trotting, groping in front of me with one hand and keeping the other on the nearest tree trunk. This was stupid. They're going to catch me. I'm just drawing it out. They found me here after I left the mountain, the other side of the country, in the middle of nowhere. It was a message. I'm not going to tell anybody. Didn't matter. I looked back and watched the edge of the foe rest. My heart beats so loud they could probably find me just by following the thumps. A tall pillar of bug zapper blue light flicks on where my cabin is. It moves so slowly it takes me a while to even realize it's gotten closer. I turn and run. crashing and flailing, kicking leaves and snapping branches. There's nowhere to go, my foot drops into a hole. Crazed rabbit panic fills me, and I wrench my leg around to see what kind of trap from beyond the stars I'm caught in. It's just a goddamn hole made by some dumb animal. Pain shoots up my calves. I gingerly take my twisted ankle out of the hole and limp forward. Time to give up. What a stupid idea. I could gimp my way into the darkness. Maybe try to cover myself with leaves, but that's just entertainment for them. A funny note in their catalog of human behavior. I ease myself down against a tree and just watch the light. When the light hits them, the tree trunks spin outward like they're elastic. They re bigger than we can see. They exist in every direction. Closer, I can almost make out the figure inside of the light. I think I'm crying, but my senses are unraveling in its presence. It is the only thing I am really aware of it. Closer. I can see the outline of the thick V-shaped head that juts back half a foot in fat tumor-like buboes. At the apex of each slant is its fleshed over eyes, wide and dense, and long brows holding in small lakes of a thin membrane. There's an eye similar to ours underneath the skin. I know. I've done autopsies. They just don't need it anymore. It's talking to me, cooing sing-song layered words packed with image and smell and sound, destruction, charred flesh, crying babies, the static, deafening, Holocaust fast and slow. Some die in flames, in quakes of reality, in molecular disease, while others die in camps, farms, zoos, and labs. There are holes in the sky. Out of them come exterminating angels, servants of a distant and inconceivable Lord. Nobody does anything. Nobody tries to stop them. It's above me. I think I hear my sobs over the words. It raises its six-fingered hand, and the digits slither forward. Two of them, vaguely warm with life, glide over my face, up my cheeks. They flatten and slowly go over my eyelid, under the bowl and back, coiling around the optic nerve to more up each nostril. The fingers divide, sending tributaries into my sinuses and down into my lungs. They atomize, passes through membrane and cell walls to get to my nervous system and brain. I'm being absorbed, translated into something intangible that they can send through the air to the ships above. They don't have to do this. There are other ways. I wake up on the floor of the White Room. I hoped it wouldn't be this. Prayed. It wasn't always, but for the past few months it mostly was. There's Ronnie Stadler, cradled in her chair made from a kind of rubbery satin. She was one of the few women at the mountain, and pretty, but pretty enough and funny. If we had gotten together before, I would have been a lucky man. They've already put the suit on me. Like a second skin, it keeps all my dander and oils in. You wouldn't know I was wearing it unless I touched you, and you felt the thin plastic dermis. I get up. The suit tightens and loosens where needed as I move. I've gotten as used to her as I can be expected to. Visions of her still float up to my brain, and I have to push them out any way I can. But when I'm with her, I can deal with it. I gently touch her arm. WHHH. There. Muffled snorting and sucking sounds from inside her. The upper row of teeth at what used to be the back of her head jostles a bit, and the tongue that hangs down under the lower set squirms against the base of her skull. He tries to turn her useless and hidden eyes to me. It's just me, Ronnie. She raises a shaking hand, and I softly take it. It hurts her, I think, even this limp touch. I want them to take me back soon, but I want them to let me stay here with them forever. I watch her blood flow. It was perfect, not a drip or seep as it ran along the outside of her veins to her heart, thick with red muscle, nestled between her lungs, rocking softly with each pump. My eyes trace the veins and arteries that make her exposed body into a road map. The quiet biological noise of her organs and her strangled breathing are the only sounds in the white cell. I still don't understand how she breathes. I sit down on the floor near her leg, and with the greatest care I rest my cheek against the let tissue and muscle of her thigh. In a stuttering shift, my eyes finally focus on the light yellow sphere piled on her belly. In the sea of liquor amni, against the bruised purple backdrop of placenta, my eyes lock on the button black eyes of our fetal daughter. Does Ronnie even know they turned her inside out right after fertilization? She must have figured out why they were forcing us to be target her. It would be easy to just reach in, break the water, and take her tiny informed body in my hands and throw her against the wall, grind her beneath my heel, rip her in two. Just as easily I could grab Ronnie's heart and mangle it into uselessness. Even easier, when I get back home I can cut my throat or blow a hole through my brain or hang myself from the tallest tree. But I love Ronnie, even though at first she cried, struggled, and looked at me with such hate. After a while she softened. Or maybe the whole ordeal just burned all the care out of her, and I love our daughter. I love her even though there's a wide furrow running through the center of her head, and it's getting deep and narrow. I don't know how long they let me stay, but it's not long enough. I wake up in my cabin, disgusted and afraid. It all feels different down here. The worst is still coming. Coming on such a definite track it might as well have already happened. Breathe in my tortured colleagues. That's what they show me in the static. When I look hard in between the shifting black and white points, past the V-shaped face, past the experiments, I see Earth. I see every television and radio blaring static like an air raid siren. A billion fathers cursing and flicking through channel after channel of snow. The only warning they get, and it will come soon,